The book of Exodus starts on a somewhat ominous note. In fact, it picks up on the same ominous note that we find at the end of the book of Genesis. You know, if you think about the overall structure of the book of Genesis, it begins with this beautiful story of creation in Genesis 1, and then there's the story of the garden. It ends not in a garden, but in a coffin. When you get to the last verse of the book of Genesis, it says, "And they placed Joseph's bones in a coffin in Egypt." It's a terrible conclusion to the book. It's one that it's a cliffhanger, what's going to happen at this point, but there's certainly that very difficult note that's there. When we start off in the book of Exodus, it says that the Israelites, they go down to Egypt. And when they go down, you'll recall that they go down in an orderly fashion. Their names are listed in this kind of census order that's there. It says that they list their names. That's that sense of identity that they have. They bring their houses with them. Now, they're not strapping RVs to the mule caravans. You know, what it means is their families that are there. But within just those first 7 verses, they lose their sense of identity. It says that they reproduce, they're fruitful and they multiply, but then it says that the land swarms with them. And that's that term that I mentioned. It's got a very negative connotation to it. That there are lots of people, but they no longer really know who. Well, that's just not a very nice term to use when you're talking about, people. It's fine if it's, straws or napkins or something, but to refer to people as a gross is not that great. And when you say swarm, it just doesn't sound right. No matter what the context. Now, I will reveal something, and I realize I will alienate about half the room when I do this, but we were at Six Flags one day, and that's not what's alienating there, but what was alienating was it was in the fall. The weather was lovely. I mean, it was just delightful. It was one of those completely unlike the living hell that is outside right now with the temperatures there. It was crisp and nice and wonderful. And it was a bye week for Alabama. And so Six Flags was just swarming with Alabama fans that day. I'm sorry, Steve, I know where your loyalties lie there. Now, you could take that if you would like and say, well, he just means there were a lot of them there. But you know that when I say the place was swarming with Alabama fans, it's just got a certain note to it that just doesn't sound very nice if you happen to, give allegiance to that school that shall not be named over there. It's a term that's negative. Well, when you look at this verse in the book of Exodus, it's got a negative connotation to it. There are lots of people, but they no longer really have that sense of who they are. What the book of Exodus is going to be about is restoring that sense of identity to the people. And I mentioned in our first session that the way that happens is it revolves around this issue of names and homes. That, right there in the first verse, these are the names of the sons of Jacob. And then it says they came with their homes. Well, when they lose their name, their identity, and they've lost their home, the place where they're supposed to thrive, what God is going to have to do over the course of the book of Exodus is to restore that to them. To restore to them a name and to restore to them a home. The way that this will work in the book of Exodus is, it's kind of a literary structure that characterizes the book. I am convinced that the book of Exodus is set up along the lines of a marriage. That what is going to happen in the book of Exodus is we are seeing one long courtship and consummation. It's first of all this courtship name to the people of Israel, and then setting the stage for the home for the people of Israel. All through the book, you get these just places where there's a word that's just a little bit out of place. And I think I've probably used this illustration with you before, but it's if you're a good movie watcher, you'll notice these lines, particularly in a thriller or a mystery type movie. There'll be something that's just a little bit off key. And you're supposed to kind of perk your ears up and go, wait a minute. Why did they draw attention to that? That's coming up again. in the future. I have steeled myself to just not spoil things for my wife because I'm a very good movie watcher. In fact, I'm too good of a movie watcher because when I watch them, I'll almost always figure it out at the end. And so when it comes up, there'll be something I'll go, okay, yep, that's going to be the key right there. There was one movie that I was unable to do this on, and some of you will have seen the movie. It was the movie The Sixth Sense. Now, I had the best movie-going experience of seeing The Sixth Sense of any human being who's ever seen the movie. And the reason for it is that I arrived at the theater late, and I didn't realize it. And so when Michelle and I entered the theater, we assumed that what we were watching was the first scene of the movie. There's Bruce Willis sitting on the stoop waiting for Haley Joel Osment to come by, and the movie just continues on. So when the movie ended the way the movie ended, I never had a clue that anything like that was in the cards. I'm such a nerd and a geek. I was almost skipping out of the movie theater, and I told my wife, literally, I'm going to have to write this guy a thank you note. This was the greatest thing I've ever seen, because it just completely blindsided me, and I just never get blindsided in those kinds of movies. It was so good, in fact, that I took my mom and my sister to see it when they visited us in Boston. And so we sit there in the theater, and I said, well, where did this scene come from? This entire opening scene where, Bruce Willis gets shot and so forth. I had never seen that. And thank heavens I did not. If I had seen that, I think I would have figured the movie out. By not seeing it, it was 10 times better. It's like when people laughed at the first showings of Spielberg's, Jaws, so he cut all the pictures of the shark out. And suddenly, it was more terrifying because you didn't know what was coming after you. This was one of those things where there are these little clues that you could pick up along the way. Good storytellers do this same thing for you. When you're reading a novel and there's just a little hint that's here, something that's supposed to perk up your attention. The book of Exodus does this. All along the way, there are these little odd references to names and to homes. When you read the opening line, these are the names of the sons of Israel. The midwives are the only characters who are named. Moses, it draws special attention to his naming, why he gets named. God reveals his name twice. First in chapter 3 and then again in chapter 6. In chapter 9 it says that I'm going to do these plagues so that my name may resound in all the earth. In the top 10 of the commandments is do not use the Lord's name for an empty purpose. In Exodus 33 it will say, Moses, this is my sign of favor toward you. I know you by name. I mean, obviously God knows Moses. But there's this special way of saying it to say names are important in this book. Houses are the same way. When the Israelites come to Egypt, they come with their homes, with their houses. It says that the midwives, because they didn't kill the infants, instead, they are given homes, meaning they're given families. It's not The Price is Right, and you get your own, special house there. They're given families. Egypt is called the house of slavery, Beit Avadim in Hebrew. And, well, what we'll see 2 weeks from now is that the way the book of Exodus concludes is that God gets a home, the tabernacle. So names and homes come up repeatedly because it's these names and home, this identity and security that God is going to provide for his people. And the way that he's going to do it is through this sort of way. The book of Exodus has been structured literarily along the lines of courtship and consummation. So if you've got your handouts there, I want to walk you through the first part of this. You should begin with one. I've actually, in contradistinction to everything I've ever done with a handout before, I've actually put numbers on them so that you can find them more easily. That removed a whole level of difficulty from this. So if you'll look at page 1 where it says a wedding at Sinai and then courtship, the first 18 chapters of the book of Exodus are going to be the section of the book of Exodus that is meant to describe the courtship between God and Israel. And if you think about what a is dating with the intention of marrying that person. And so it's when we think about this, it's not, so God has decided, well, I really don't like that girl anymore, so I think I'll try a new nation. It's more the idea of this is the beginning of a relationship whose destination is a marriage between the two. And you really can see how when you look at the overall structure of this part of the book, it is set up in two panels that are there. So in the first one, it's God courting Moses. And then in the second panel, it'll be God courting the nation as a whole. Notice how the two panels, first God courting Moses and then God courting the rest of the nation, they have the same kind of themes that come up again and again. First of all, we find the nation, well, actually since Moses comes first of all, we find Moses under threat. You'll notice it says that Pharaoh imposes labor. They made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in every kind of field labor. They were ruthless in the tasks that they imposed upon them. So in this first panel where the people are under threat, Pharaoh imposes labor. In the second panel, he's going to increase the labor. Let heavier work be laid on them. Then they will labor at it and pay no attention to deceptive words. So that's when Pharaoh increases their labor so that he thinks, well, that way they won't be listening to Moses. And never completely understood that one. If I increase the labor, they'll want deliverance less. It didn't really seem, I used to have a sticker that when I taught high school in my class, I had it up on the bulletin board. It says, the beatings will continue until morale improves. So some of you probably heard that one before. Just love that one. It had a Jolly Roger, the skull and crossbones on there. It fit perfectly. In any case, we've seen that Pharaoh acts quite foolish all along the way in this early part, and that certainly seems to be of a piece with it. So Pharaoh imposes labor, and then Pharaoh increases labor. There are these moments of deliverance that are there. Notice in the first panel with Moses strikes the Egyptian. The Hebrew word there is that word nakah that he uses. It says, he looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. In the second panel, Moses will strike not just the Egyptian, but he'll strike all of Egypt. Thus says the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. See, with the staff that is in my hand, I will strike. Nakah, the same Hebrew word there. The water that is in the Nile, and it shall Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh. He settled in the land of Midian and sat down by a well. So now Pharaoh is angry and Moses has to flee. It says in the second panel here that he provokes Pharaoh's wrath. Then Pharaoh said to him, get away from me. Take care that you do not see my face again, for on the day that you see my face, you shall die. This is where Pharaoh has made his threat before that last plague that will just utterly break Pharaoh, and so that he's finally begging Moses to bless him. So Moses strikes the Egyptian, provokes Pharaoh's wrath. He strikes all of Egypt, provoking Pharaoh's wrath. In both of these, there's the escape to Midian. So when Moses is fleeing from Pharaoh, the place where he goes is over to Midian. The priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flocks, but some shepherds came and drove them away. Moses got up and came to their defense and watered their flocks. So where has he fled? He's fled to the land of Midian. When the Israelites flee from Egypt, they will go to the same place. They'll go to Midian. It says in the second panel, I will be standing there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it, so that the people may drink. Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. Do you see the connection? Moses flees to Midian and provides water for the flocks. Moses flees to Midian with the Israelites and provides water for the people and their flocks. In both passages, this is what happens. In the first panel, when Moses gets to Midian, he settles down and he goes out into the wilderness. He's there on the, Ahar Hamidbar in Hebrew, on the backside of the wilderness. And that's when he has this encounter with God. It says, there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. The name for the bush in Hebrew is the word Sinai. The place where the Israelites are going to go when they flee from Egypt is Sinai. It's a wordplay. It's the kind of wordplay that, if you're reading the text in its original language, you're supposed to pick up on that. That when Moses, in fact, we already, by the time we're reading the book, we know the story of Sinai. So when we hear that, moment when God appeared to Moses in a Sinai, our ears perk up and we go, oh, wait a minute. It's because it's that kind of insider language that we catch. I told you this illustration a few weeks ago, but when George W. Bush was doing one of his State of the Union addresses, and he referred to faith-based organizations, and he says, because there's power, wonder-working power in these organizations. Well, everybody who grew up in a low church kind of context like I did knew the song. There's power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. It was an inside kind of language that you perk up and hear. My sons and I, we have dozens of these that are related to like The Sandlot or something, or we watch a lot of baseball movies in our family. A League of Their Own. When we there'll be one where Marla Hooch, what a hitter! It's that great scene from A League of Their Own where they've made all of these young ladies to be beautiful so that they'll get more fans that are out there. And well, God bless her, Marla's not the prettiest of them. And so while they're showing Gina Davis, right here on camera, Marla is somewhere out, in deep in the infield there. Marla Hooch, what a hitter. And so this kind of line will be passed around in our family, and all of us will start, well, God bless her, Michaela does not participate in baseball illusions. But the boys and I, we will, laugh because it's that insider language. It's the same thing going on here. It's the kind of language that you pick up on because you know the story. Here, Moses meets God at Sinai, and eventually the Israelites will go back. When the Lord descended upon Mount Sinai, to the top of the mountain, the Lord summoned Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. God meets Moses at Sinai. God meets Israel at Sinai. Now, one of the oddities of this is that you can go to Mount Sinai today. You can go. There's a monastery that's there called St. Catherine's Monastery. It's right at the bottom of Mount Sinai, not Mount Sinai, but the Sinai Peninsula there. And there's not a chance in the world that it's the right spot for where Mount Sinai was. So it's a lovely monastery, and it's just in the wrong place. Mount Sinai is in northwest Saudi Arabia. And so that's the location where they go. It's where Midian was. And we know that from the encounter that Moses has at the bush, that they're going to come back to the same place. Where he initially said, when I do my trips to Israel, I always say there are places that are like, and places that are near, and places that are is places. And St. Catherine's is not an is. It's not really near. But it is probably like, Mount Sinai because it's a mountain. Okay, moving on. Oh, no. The second sheet did not make its way over here. Do we have some extra copies of the second sheet? Or did this side over here hog all of the, Okay, I think we've got some coming around. Here's an extra. There we go. So no, look at you trying to get them the first sheet.
I want the first sheet.
Oh. Well, I don't need an extra one. All right, so the sheet that we're going to look at here for the rest is the description of, first there was the courtship, and if you kind of step back for a moment and think about what's going on in the courtship, I realize that all of this language of courtship and consummation is quite patriarchal, but we're just going to embrace that for the day, okay? So in the courtship, it's basically the groom-to-be trying to lay out his credentials to say that I am a worthy suitor. I'm someone who is a person with the means and the attitude to take care of you. That's the logic of it. And that's what God is doing in that first panel of the book, or the first half of the book, is that in chapters 1 through 4, he is basically demonstrating to Moses, I'm powerful, and yet I care, and I will exercise both of those things toward you. Is that I'm powerful enough that I've called you to myself, and you're going to do what I'm telling you. But on the other hand, I care about you. You know, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Moses, don't worry about that. I'll be with you. It's God saying to Moses, I am with you. I'm behind you. I'm not just behind you. I'm behind you and in front of you. Moses, doesn't really matter who you are. It matters who I am, and I'm here to take care of you. And then in the second part, and that's what we looked at last week, is God demonstrating to the Israelites again both of those issues, both the power and the provision. On the one hand, Israel, you've seen what I did at the sea. You've seen what I did with the plagues. You've seen all of these things. I have the power and the authority to command you. But on the other hand, I care for you, and I'll provide for you. And so whether it's providing sweet water instead of bitter, or manna, or water from the rock for you to wet. When we get to chapters 19 to 24, this sort of central part of the book of Exodus, this is where we move from God laying out, his credentials in this extended courtship to finally the consummation of this relationship. I am utterly convinced that the Sinai experience is meant to be read as a wedding, a marriage between God and Israel. I think if you walk through the steps with me, which I've laid out for you here, I think that, there are ways that you tell a story. And so here we have the event of Sinai, but they have structured the event literarily as the story of a wedding. One of the most humorous parts of this entire thing is that Moses is a mountain climber to put Sir Edmund Hillary to shame. I've listed for you here, just at the top, all of the times that Moses has to go up and down the mountain. In verse 3, Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him from the mountain. Verse 7, so Moses came, summoned the elders of the people. That's back down at the bottom. Okay, and then verse, I have to stand back here to read my tiny little writing. Moses reported the words of the people to the Lord, back up the mountain. And then the next verse, so Moses went down from the mountain to the people. Verse 20, Moses went up. And then verse 20 something or other there, Moses went down to the people. He goes up and down the mountain repeatedly here. Now, when I do my Israel trips, one of the things where I have gotten better and better with my trips is I have paid more and more attention to elevation on the trips. God bless them, the first crew that I took to Israel, it was like the Bataan Death March. We went up and we went down, and I remember so vividly one time we were down way at the bottom of something or other, and we walked a mile up Mount Son of a Gun just to get up to the place where we were going to eat lunch. When I kind of went back by myself one time, I said, okay, we're going to have to rethink this. And I have worked ceaselessly to try to arrange it so that the bus drops us off at the top, and we walk our way down to the bottom. And then the bus gets us again, and it'll take us back up to the top. It's like a ski lift, with this every time. It's because, much like Birmingham, Jerusalem just doesn't do flat. It's just all hills that are there. Poor Moses. Here the guy is. He's up and down with this. And what I can't get out of my head is he is for all the world. He looks like the kid in elementary school that you have tapped to pass a note to the young lady that you have, fallen victim to her wiles. And so you write the little note, do you like me, yes or no? You never put maybe, because if you put maybe will be the answer. So you put, do you like me, yes or no? And then you either have to walk by and furtively drop the note yourself there, or you have to get someone else to be the kind of matchmaker and go-between for you, who can deliver the note, await the reply, and then bring it back. This is Moses. Moses is the matchmaker here. He's the one passing notes between God and Israel. And I realize I have a fairly cynical and perverse sense of humor here, but when I think of Moses doing this, I'm like, at a certain point when I've gone up the mountain once or twice, I'm like, God, you are omnipresent. Is it really necessary for me to walk all the way up to this daggum mountain again just so you could tell me the answer? And for me, how about if you're everywhere, I could just say it. I could go in my tent and you could appear. And yet, nope, got to go up and down the mountain so we can sign this Hebrew note. Do you like me, yes or no? It's really quite comical. All right. Having said that, the first step of the wedding that will take place here is God is going to outline his credentials as the groom. It says here in Exodus 19, then Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the Israelites, you have seen what I did. He's laying out his credentials. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. This is the part that I assume a lot of the men, at least in this room, have done, where when it was time for you to propose, you went and talked to the bride's father. And you kind of laid out your credentials. And, I remember vividly talking to Michela's dad. And since I was, in college, and with more college ahead, and at the end of that, the shining rainbow of gold there that would be there. It's like any other homeless vagabond. I will be able to provide for her. That's one of the things that you do, is you kind of outline your credentials. Now, God doesn't have to report to any father there, but he is saying to the Israelites, I have done this. It's reason enough to trust me that I will do the same in the future. And so the second part, the groom proposes. Now, therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession out of all the peoples. Indeed, the whole earth is mine, but you shall be for me a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the Israelites. When the groom proposes here, what he's saying is, look, I own everything, but you are going to be special to me. All the peoples are mine, but you're going to be my treasured possession. The word holy means set apart. You're going to be set apart to me. When I perform weddings, I'll usually, I meet with the bride and the groom along the way. I don't do much in the way of marital counseling. I usually get them to do their own pastors for that. But I'll always talk to them, at least some, and say, understand what's going on with this particular commitment that you're making. Is that it is not as if all of the sudden 3.5 billion women are going to disappear, or 3.5 billion men are going to disappear. What you're saying with this commitment is, it just doesn't matter. All of those other ones don't count. You're the only one who's for me. I tell them, you are kidding yourself if you think that of 7 billion people on planet Earth, that you are going to marry the prettiest or the smartest or the wittiest or the funniest or any of those things. You are not going to marry the superlative in any category of the other person. Someone that you meet along the way is going to be smarter, or they're going to be prettier, or whatever. They may even match you better, and it is utterly irrelevant. The commitment that you are making is to say, you are the one who belongs to me. All of those others are just not options. The whole world's still out there, but you're mine, and I'm yours. That's the logic of the marriage that's there. Only once, with Adam and Eve, did somebody get the best of all of the options that were out there. From that point forward, it was a mess. And there are actually traditions about how there were more women than Eve. That's where Lilith comes in and stuff like that. So there have been problems from the start. Well, here God is saying to Israel, you're not necessarily the best. In fact, he will emphasize that on several occasions. I didn't pick you because you were the biggest and the best. Elders of the people, and set before them, Moses reported the words of the people to the Lord. So now that the groom has proposed and the bride has accepted, they set the wedding date. Now, this is not going to be a long engagement. We went to a wedding yesterday, and the couple had been dating for 7 years. They got married just about as soon as they could. They started dating when they were 14, and so they were just, you could tell they were utterly meant for one another. Their relationship began when she said to him, "You're sitting next to me on the bus," and he went, "Okay." And from that point forward, the date was basically set. We're getting married. Moses had told the words of the people to the Lord. The Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes." They set the date, 2 days, and then I'll be there on the third. So the bride is going to remain home until the groom comes for her. Now, this is something that's different. In fact, it's exactly the reverse of the way that our marriage ceremonies are structured. If you think about the logic of our marriage ceremonies, every ceremony that I've ever done, I go to the front of the church or whatever venue we're at with the groom, and the bride comes to the groom. This is not the way they did ancient weddings. In ancient weddings, the bride stays home and the groom comes to her. Now, it's a lovely kind of image. In fact, it's the image, if you ever watch Fiddler on the Roof, you'll notice that's the way it happens when Motel marries Zeitel. That, she's at home and there he is with great fanfare. There he's got the top hat on, and there's the klezmer band that's playing and so forth as he goes to get her. This is not how we do it now. I had one guy who he wanted to do something, and his intentions were very good. And I had to just say, under no circumstances may you do this. He didn't like the idea that, I don't know the right way to put it, but he didn't like the idea that he was taking possession of her. And that somehow, she was coming to him and she now belonged to him. It was a very egalitarian kind of sentiment. He wanted to say, no, she's my equal. We're wedding together and so forth. And he said, so instead of her walking, to me, let her be up there and then I'll come, to her. And I said, Taylor, under no circumstances may you do this, because the person who walks the aisle is the center of attention. And this is not about you, it's about her. And if you walk the aisle, it's making it look like you're the star of this show. And he saw that immediately and he said, well, no, that's not what I intended at all. And I said, okay, so we'll stipulate in the vows and so forth that you're not taking ownership of her, that kind of thing, but let her walk the aisle because this day's about her. People will hardly even notice you're there. So there was a wonderful Baxter Black comedy routine where he said that really you could just take a cardboard cutout of the guy and stick him up there and it would serve all of the purpose that the groom has. He could just go ahead to the honeymoon site and just be waiting there. So it was really quite good. All right. So while waiting for the groom, the bride prepares herself. So Moses went down from the mountain to the people. He consecrated the people. They washed their clothes. He said to the people, prepare for the third day. Do not go near a woman. So in other words, no sex for these 3 days here. There's an allusion in there to the idea of not jumping the gun before the wedding. We have all of these traditions that, they look so lovely and nice, but what they all center around is don't have sex before you get married. There's why are you not allowed to see the bride on her wedding day? Oh, it's just so you won't see her dress and so forth. No, it's so you won't get ideas about, it's just this afternoon and do something that you're not supposed to. I saw a wonderful video one time of, it was about Jerusalem, and there was a Jewish family that was going to get married, and the bride's family was ultimately from Yemen. And so they had all of these beautiful Yemeni traditions that were there. And one of them was that they put henna on the hands of the bride and the groom. And the narrator, it was actually Christopher Plummer who was doing the narrating, he says, and if the henna remains there in the morning, it is a sign that the wedding will be blessed. No, what it really is if the henna is still there in the morning, then the night before the wedding, the couple kept their hands to themselves. And so that was why the wedding would be blessed here, that do not approach a woman. It's the same kind of logic that's there. All right. Finally, the groom approaches with great fanfare. On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning, as well as a thick cloud on the mountain, and a blast of a trumpet so loud that all the people who were in the camp trembled. So now the groom is beginning to approach, and as he approaches, that's when the bride comes out of her tent, comes out of her house. It says, Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God. They took their stand at the foot of the mountain. So here has God come to get them. The groom is coming to get them, and they go out to meet the groom. The groom arrives. Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended upon it in fire. The smoke went up like the smoke of a kiln, while the whole mountain shook violently. As the blast of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses would speak, and God would answer him in thunder. When the Lord descended upon Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, the Lord summoned Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. You know, this was an experience in the life of Israel, which was apparently so overwhelming that they remember it again and again and again. It just echoes again and again on the pages of Scripture, their experience at Sinai, when they are prone to doubt, when they are prone to stray. Over and over again, the biblical authors say, remember when we met God at Sinai. It was a powerful event for the people. Okay, on the back. When the couple have now actually met with one another, the groom will recite the vows. It says, God spoke all these words. He'll begin with his credentials again. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. And then we'll recite the terms of the marriage, the Ten Commandments and the Book of the Covenant. And notice how in the Ten Commandments you get this language that starts it off. It's the language of exclusivity. You shall have no other gods, and the term in Hebrew is lifanai, which means in my face. Literally, you know, lu it means two or four, and then panim is the word for face, and the I means my. When you have these other gods, lifanai, it's like you're taking someone that you're having an affair with, and you trot them right in front of your spouse. And he says, don't you have any other gods in my face? No other gods, and then no images, no idols. It's the language of exclusivity. It's the same kind of language that we do in marriage ceremonies today. That language of love and honor and cherish, be faithful till death do us part. That kind of language. It's the language that says that we are exclusive to one another. There's a wonderful scene, in the movie Braveheart when the couple gets married and their vows are as simple as they could be. I'll love you my whole life and no one else. I mean, that's it. This is the language that God and Israel are expressing. So now he promises to care for the bride. This is our language for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, that kind of language. I'm going to send an angel in front of you to guard you on the way and to bring you to the place that I prepared. Be attentive to him and listen to his voice. Don't rebel against him, for he will not pardon your transgression, for my name is in him. But if you listen attentively to his voice and do all that I say, I'll be an enemy to your enemy, a foe to your foes. I'm going to bring you to the land, is what he says. So now the bride accepts the vows. We're on the other side of the Ten Commandments now, Exodus 24. Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances. They record the vows. And so it says Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. He rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, set up 12 pillars corresponding to the 12 tribes of Israel. Now there's an interesting kind of thing here. I had to stop wearing my wedding ring at a certain point because I worked at UPS, and there's a terrible danger when you're wearing a ring in an industrial environment like that called a ring avulsion, where your ring gets caught and it takes your finger with you. And I had enough terrible things that happened to me while I worked there, from, conking my head into trucks and having to get CAT scans and nearly breaking my kneecap and things like that. So I haven't got my wedding ring is with me. I just don't have it on my finger all the time. But it's this symbol that marks a couple as being wed. Israel and God are going to have symbols that mark the fact that they are wed. They're both going to be sprinkled with blood. Now, notice the way it happens. It says the vows are reaffirmed and both the bride and the groom receive a sign of their marriage covenant. He sent young men of the people of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed oxen as offerings of well-being to the Lord. Moses took half the blood and put it in basins, and half the blood he dashed against the altar. He takes half the blood and he dashes it against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant, read it in the hearing of the people. They said, all that the Lord has spoken we'll do. We will be obedient. Moses took the blood and dashed it on the people. The same blood that marks God by marking the altar marks the people. These are the rings, the wedding rings. They mark these two parties that are in this marriage. Now, the bride approaches the groom. I find this part really interesting. Then Moses and Aaron, Nadav and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel. Prior to this, they were not allowed to even approach the mountain. In fact, God said, if anyone crosses the line and goes up on the mountain, shoot them with an arrow. Don't go up yourself to get them, because then you'll get killed. Just shoot them. Don't approach me. And yet now, the elders and Moses and Aaron, Nadav and Abihu, they go up the mountain and they see God. Under his feet there was something like a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for clearness. God did not lay his hand on the chief men of the people of Israel, and they beheld God. Why are they able to go up and behold God and God not kill them? Because they're married now. They weren't married before, and they couldn't approach. God and Israel are now married. Now, I'll close with this because I've just got a little point left. One of the funniest moments in any of my classes that I have ever taught was a moment when I was at this very point in my lecture, and I said, so what happens after the wedding ceremony that's here? And I had a couple who was over on my left, and this was a spring class. We were toward the end of the class. I mean, we were mid-April, and I would be doing that. In fact, I did their wedding ceremony, and it was only about 3 weeks after that class when I was going to do their wedding ceremony. And they were hopelessly in love, and within weeks of finally getting to express that, and so I said, well, what happens after the wedding ceremony? And the young man said, just a little bit too eagerly, loudly, and forcefully, the honeymoon, which broke up the entire class. And his bride-to-be patted him on the arm and said, we're almost there. Just be patient. I never really recovered from that. Exactly. The wedding feast. Notice the next line. It says, the people of Israel, they beheld God and they ate and drank. They are up on the mountain with God and they eat a meal with God. It's the wedding feast. They are now in God's presence and they are able to celebrate with this wedding feast. That's when the honeymoon portion takes place. The bride and groom enter the nuptial tent. Well, the tent is the tabernacle. God makes the tent, and the cloud is going to be the tent, and Moses enters into the tent. This is the symbol of God and the people of Israel consummating their relationship. They enter into the bridal tent, and they are now married. This image of their being married will extend acting like an unfaithful wife. In fact, that's going to be the ominous note that will highlight the latter part of the book of Exodus, isn't it? It's the golden calf. Why is it that there will be such anger on God's part over the golden calf? It's because from the divine perspective, once we've read this in context, he'll say, you're cheating on me. And he'll respond as an aggrieved husband an aggrieved spouse to say, you're cheating on me when you go after these other gods. It's the beauty and the danger of the relationship. The beauty of the relationship is a kind of intimacy that no other people ever experienced before. The danger of the relationship is that exclusivity idea. Now, you belong to me and I belong to you. And if you go towards someone else, it's the stakes are higher than before. You are my treasured possession. But as my treasured possession, you need to follow through on that second part, which is everything the Lord has said we will do. I think it's the beauty and the danger of our own relationship with God. That on the one hand, we experience a kind of intimacy with God. And on the other hand, when we stray, the consequences are higher, I think. Let's pray. Father in heaven, Lord, I thank you for this beautiful section of Scripture. Lord, I thank you for the way that you entered into relationship with the people of Israel, and then so many years later allowed us to be grafted into that same group of people. Father in heaven, I pray that we would cling to you as a spouse, and that we would experience both your love and provision in doing so. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, see y'all 2 weeks from now, okay?